Welcome back to FireWatch Live. I'm Tom DeSorcy, and I'm joined by Scott Metzler. In our last session, we talked about how leadership can be risky and the challenges leaders face when driving change. Today, we're diving into how leadership changes you. If the honest exercise of leadership isn't stretching you or pushing your boundaries, you're likely not doing it right. Leadership should challenge you to grow, but sometimes it can also distort your perception, especially when ego gets involved. Scott will take us through how common leadership practices can lead to unhealthy behaviors, like feeding your ego instead of feeding the needs of your team. We'll explore how to avoid these traps and stay focused on effective, authentic leadership. Scott, a pleasure to have you here again.
Thank you, Tom. It's good to be here.
Yeah, you want to. This is I wouldn't. There's scary moments in discussions about leadership, and it's all, it hasn't been all, I should say, hasn't been all flowers and heroism, and this is what we do. I'm in charge. Everything is great. You kind of got to be prepared for what's coming, and it's. I guess I called it that. It's not what I signed up for moment when you start to realize that, whoa, this wasn't in the brochure, as I've said before. The the honest exercise of leadership. It's pretty simple, kind of straightforward. Someone's got to be in charge. But explain this. If it doesn't stretch you in some way, you're probably not doing it right.
You bet. Right. So yeah, the honest exercise of leadership, and that is to serve the people who look to you for leadership, to feed them, if you will, is kind of the opposite of what we've been conditioned to think about leadership for some time. And so whether we're in charge, whether we are that formal authority figure in an organization, or whether we are that small L leader, the work of leadership stretches us if we're doing it well. So, when we agree to leadership, we're agreeing to learning and teaching. And so what I like to say is, if we're not teaching, we're probably not leading.
Leadership is part reward. Is it most reward or just a part?
Yeah, I think that's a really great question. And I think the answer lies in how you view leadership and what you want to do with it. And so if you're entering a leadership position in order to fill some unmet need or to stroke your ego, it probably does feel like a reward. If, on the other hand, you're entering a leadership position to serve the organization or to serve your team members and to invest in other people's success, it may feel like less of a reward. It may feel like a lot more work.
Would you consider this an exercise in self-assessment?
Absolutely. I'm fond of saying that all leadership starts with self-leadership. And that begins with being very self-aware. And sometimes, especially when we get a promotion and people are saying nice things about us, and we get the perks that go along with the responsibility of formal leadership positions, sometimes we have a distorted view of ourselves, and sometimes we have a distorted view of others. And so, the ability to be really brutally, honestly self-aware is so important when we enter leadership.
On the fire ground, and we are leaning toward the emergency services, and certainly we've talked about business, and I want to talk more in this session about the business side. But from the world of emergency services, we're used to seeing and looking for and seeing signs. Is this? I mean, obviously, we're looking for signs that we're not doing it right. Can we maybe explain or give us a preview as to some of these signs? How can you tell that things are not going the way they should?
Right. I would look at two specific areas. One is the reactions and the responses that we're getting from the people who are looking to us for leadership. Those people who trust us to invest in them, to show them the way, to do the right thing. We can kind of tell how those relationships are developing and whether they seem healthy, which isn't the same as everyone's happy all the time. So we have to be really honest and really pay attention to the conversations that we have and that we initiate around leadership. And so, one of the key elements of good leadership is good communication. And often, a simple conversation approached with curiosity will help us understand how effective we are. The other piece is we look at the organizational results. So the outcomes of our leadership, the efforts of others, how those things blend together to move the organization forward to meet our goals. So those are two places I would look to kind of judge whether I'm doing leadership well or not.
If you're new to this, in terms of some of the folks that we speak to that say this is what we're telling you what to expect, what to watch out for, but maybe to not be as concerned as you might be when this comes about.
Well, right. So one of the things that I would encourage new leaders is to again, pay attention to the folks who look to us for leadership, but also develop a peer and mentor network. And so, one of the things that we realize as we sort of ascend the ladder of success in an organization, the higher we go, the smaller our peer groups get. And, when we get to the very tippy top of these organizations, there aren't many people like us. So we have to find those folks either inside our discipline or outside our discipline who can serve as unemotional sounding boards, people who aren't necessarily invested in the outcome of our leadership, but who can help us, develop that self-awareness, almost to do that buddy check. Hey, I want to bounce something off of you, Tom. Does it seem right the way I'm approaching this situation or that situation? And then, developing this idea of sustainable leadership. So peers and folks, again, either within our organization or without our organization, that we can go to for counseling, debriefing, that sort of thing. So developing professional friendships is very important for leadership.
We're telling people today that, hey, you may not be doing it right. So what happens if you ignore these signs? What are the negative effects from not doing it right, and I guess not even recognizing it and plowing straight through?
Right. So, one of the things that I'm fond of saying is that we can judge the effectiveness of our leadership by gauging the strength of our relationships. And so when our relationships seem off, they probably are rather, and that could be an indication that we might not be doing things right. And so, again, just, often the last person to realize they're not doing a good job of leadership is the leader who's not doing it well. And so being open to feedback, actually seeking out that feedback from trusted colleagues and peers, and paying attention to what those folks are telling us is really important. And, when our ego gets in the way, sometimes that's the hardest thing to do.
When we ask people or tell people to recognize the signs, and again, if you don't, and it goes to the extreme where you're losing it, how can you recover? How does one recover from this if it goes that far?
Yeah, I don't know that we can always recover, but some strategies for that is what I call just really brutal honesty and transparency. And so when we understand that we've gotten it wrong, the worst thing in the world we can do is try to hide it or cover it up or double down on the wrongdoing. So we have to be honest enough and vulnerable enough and secure enough in our personhood and our position to say, it seems like I have gotten this wrong. I tried my best and I've fallen short, and I apologize for that. Can you help me get back on track? So that conversation up the chain of command, down the chain of command, and sort of, laterally really helps to instill trust in your leadership. It helps you come across as an authentic person who really is invested in doing the right thing for the people who look to you for leadership, as well as the organization you serve.
You've alluded to earlier, and you've said much earlier, said before, that many common leadership practices stroke the ego. It distorts leaders' perceptions. Explain that.
It sure can. Yeah. So, this idea of heroic leadership has been around for a long time, and it's been called a lot of things, but it's basically that top down. I'll tell you what to do, and then I'll tell you what to do next. And so it takes the decision making out of the hands of the people who probably should be doing the decision making at the point of service, and it places it with you. And nothing feels better than for someone to ask for direction and for you to have the right answer, to sort of, swoop in and save the day. And while that might feel good, it's really hard to scale. And so, we might be able to get away with that on simple tasks, but, once an incident begins to expand, we can't have all the answers as leaders. We've got to trust our people. And that leadership then hopefully has been done before in the firehouses, on the training grounds. And so that, we're in a place where we trust our people to exercise leadership from their positions so that we don't end up being the end all be all. So yeah, it's really important to understand the idea of decentralized leadership. One
This,
of the
this
things, oh,
Go
go
ahead.
ahead.
Go ahead. Continue.
Yeah, yeah. One of the things that happens, when we stroke our own ego is it tends to get pretty inflated. And one of the things that is, has been sort of a catchphrase in the fire service for a long time is that ego eats brains for breakfast.
It seems to me that you may be misleading yourself, leading yourself down the wrong path.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Which is why it's so important to have, this system of open conversation, to normalize conversations about leadership, to normalize conversations about when it goes well and when it doesn't go well. And as a leader, especially as an authority figure, to be open to listening to what people say.
I don't know if I want to ask you about this study, but I don't know if it's, is this a clinical study or considered, at what level would you consider the Cookie Monster study? What is that?
Right. Yeah, the Cookie Monster study was a study that came out of the psychology department in the University of Wisconsin, I think in the early to mid 1990s. And basically it was this: they assembled groups of 3 participants, and I think they had maybe 30 or 40 groups. And they told these groups of 3 people, we're going to bring you in and have you do 2 hours worth of very complicated work. We're testing your attention and your attention to detail and all of those sorts of things. And so as they brought these people into the room in groups of 3, they selected one person and told them they were the leader, and their job was to assign points to the other 2 people who were doing the tasks. And so this was just an arbitrary decision. They were picked at random. There was nothing special about these people other than they were the leader. And so these folks came in groups of 3, and they did their tasks, and the leader assigned the points. And about 30 minutes into this exercise, someone came in with a tray of cookies and said, "You all have been doing a really great job. Why don't you have a little break? Here's a snack." And so what was on the tray each time were 5 cookies. And so everybody had a cookie, and it was great. And there were 2 left over. And more than 8 out of 10 times, the arbitrary leader felt compelled to have an extra cookie, leaving 1 additional cookie for the other people to sort of navigate. And so, just the idea that somebody tells you you're the leader just shifts your frame of mind. It just changes things ever so slightly. And so, when that happens in the real world, we see the outflow of that. People think because they're leaders, they're authority figures, perhaps they're entitled to things that they're not entitled to. Perhaps their decisions are better than they really are. Perhaps people should listen to them more than they really should. And so, yeah, we tend to get in our own way at times.
Are you suggesting that we take this to the fire halls and start baking cookies and do this test, maybe?
That might be a great experiment.
when you mention entitlement, that's my first thought, is that people may think that they're entitled to this, where the other side of the coin, I'd like to think of myself saying, okay, I'm great, but I'm gonna, you people need to have it. I don't need anything. I need to suffer, if you will,
Right.
in leadership. Would you find that which way people would go the most, do you think, or would you have an opinion on that?
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, in my experience, I've seen it go both ways, and I've seen people turn it around when it seems to be going the wrong way. So, yeah, I think one of the things that I'm very aware of is that leaders, good leaders and bad leaders, are parts of dynamic systems, and so the leader never does it alone. So leadership requires systems of followership, systems of trust, systems of communication. And when we're not paying attention to those things, sometimes it tends to go off the rails.
We're on this food kick now, and talking about cookies, but you refer to feeding hungers. Give us some examples of feeding the hunger.
Right. Yeah. So that's just a way of saying, when we let our ego drive the bus, sometimes we feel like we're entitled to more than our fair share, and that can manifest itself in sort of metaphysical hungers, if you will. And so, when we see in our country celebrities or political figures who do what seem like kind of silly things, and they get caught with their hand in the proverbial cookie jar, there with food again, right? Um, I often wonder how that makes sense. Like, how did it make sense that that person who is otherwise smart and capable, and all of the other things, did this silly thing and got themselves in trouble? And oftentimes it reverts back to they felt entitled to things that they weren't really entitled to. And so again, it's just our ego's way of sort of, getting in our own way.
Do you think that in terms of doing something wrong, you say if you're not being stretched, then you're probably not leading right or doing it right, as we said from the outset. Is it important for the people being led to also watch for this? Could you see those that are on the other side pointing this out to a leader?
I think so. And I think, it can be done in healthy ways. And so if we've done a good job of creating a trustworthy system, a trusting container where we have, open conversations and honest conversations about these things, leaders who are open to hearing feedback that perhaps doesn't stroke the ego, it can be a very positive thing. On the other hand, if we haven't paid attention to those things, if we haven't developed healthy systems, it can really get ugly. And we see all kinds of, organizational misconduct. We see gossip. We see people trying to take the leader out. We see people talking behind the leader's back, or maybe working at cross purposes with the leader, making sure that they don't succeed, and perhaps making sure that their initiatives don't succeed.
I always like to ask you, and we've had these conversations more so about the interaction that you have with people that you address during sessions, and leaders who are current or future leaders. And do you hear in their voices, do you hear some of the fear that comes out from the stuff that you're telling them, that they may be afraid of doing this?
Sometimes I do. And one of the things that I've noticed in my practice of leadership and helping folks develop capacity for leadership is that leadership is something that for some reason doesn't get talked about, and people often end up in positions of leadership without the necessary formal training and education to succeed. And so when we think about the amount of training we expect people to participate in and show mastery of before we give them a hose line or a chainsaw, or before we let them drive the fire truck, right? That's a lot. We invest a lot in the success of our people at the task level, but often at the leadership level, we expect that they're somehow just going to get it. Right. And so we toss them a new badge or a different colored helmet and say, just do the best you can. And that's a pretty lousy way to prepare people to succeed. And so that fear often is born from a place where people feel like, I don't know everything I should know, but perhaps I should know it. And so if I ask a question, it's going to give me away that I don't know everything that I should know. And so often, it's a very trepidatious time for people.
In the early beginnings, would you suggest that in terms of the early beginnings of being a firefighter, that you're not getting enough training as what, not necessarily being a leader, but certainly how a leader should be acting in an appropriate manner and what you can expect from your leaders?
Sure. One of the things that I recommend for new firefighter training or indoctrination is followership, having conversations about what it means to be a good follower at your level. And here's how that intersects and interacts with people who are exercising leadership. And when we're both doing those jobs together and in sync, we're really going to make progress on some tough challenges. But when we don't have those conversations, that's when things go awry. And so, again, just normalizing the act of having conversations around what leadership is, what we can expect, and how you can serve people from your position who are exercising leadership. Those are invaluable conversations.
I think if you are listening carefully and you realize that some of the terminology that is used or you use quite often, and one of them is exercise. I like that in terms of exercise about, I guess, practice. The more you practice, the better you're going to get.
You bet. And, this kind of goes back to our earlier conversation about the idea that anybody can exercise leadership at any time from any position. And so that necessarily means leadership is not a position, it's an act, it's a verb. And so we expect people who inhabit positions of authority to exercise leadership. And they don't always do that. Sometimes they just stay in their exercise of authority, which is different from leadership.
I have a favorite analogy. I have several analogies that I use quite often, and certainly from a sporting world in terms of being involved in the odd competitive sport or game or championship, if you will, where I was taught at a young age that going out, on the ice or going into the field, that if I was nervous. I felt, I didn't want to be into this final game, but I was told, and I picked up on that earlier on, long ago, that if you're not into it, then or rather, if you're not feeling nervous, you're not into it.
Right.
That's like, I would think, and I equate that to now leadership today by saying, again, this goes back to the beginning. You're probably not doing it right. You're probably not into it. You need to expect to feel this, and it's going to be, dare I use the word, normal?
Yeah, I think that's a really great point. And so, one of the things that I think is really useful is to also normalize conversations around embodiment. And so it's important for us to say or to be honest about the idea that we don't always know the right answer all of the time. So this idea of shared leadership, that leadership is a team sport, and it doesn't always feel great. Sometimes it feels scary. Sometimes when we know that we're going to exercise leadership a new way and we're being stretched, maybe we lose our appetite. Maybe we can't sleep very well. And so, having those conversations so that new leaders or people who are stretching themselves and feel uneasy about it understand that that's not wrong, right? That's normal. That's how it goes. And we practice leadership, we exercise leadership, we get help when we need help, we talk about these things, and we get better. Pretty soon, the butterflies go away and it's time to stretch. It's time to stretch again.
Are you ever fearful when you talk to new leaders that you might be scaring them off?
Yeah, I don't know that I'm fearful. I feel like having honest conversations about these things is a gift. And so I feel really good about sharing this gift of open, honest conversation in a place of non-judgment, in a place where I'm not emotionally attached to the outcome, and we can ask all of the questions we need to ask so that we can grow as a team.
We've alluded to, again, business and and the business world and the emergency services world. And I'm just wondering, in terms of the pressures that come along with leadership, and again, what to expect. Emergency service leadership versus business leadership. Does an emergency service provider make a better business leader, or do you think it's the other way around?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if I can make a judgment about that. I will say, regardless of the discipline, whether you work in a bank or a firehouse or anything in between, I think to a great degree, leadership is leadership is leadership. The rest of it is details, right? So if we are investing in the success of other people, if we're helping people change and grow and navigate that growth and change in healthy ways, if we're mobilizing people to make progress on tough challenges, then we're exercising leadership.
I want to go back just a little bit, and we talked about, the exercise. We talked about the I guess the outcomes if you don't do things right. Is there recovery from again going too deep and not recognizing that you're not doing the right things? And I always lean back to the term inappropriate behavior, and that is
Right.
there are risks. There are bigger risks involved, not necessarily personal risks, but personal beyond into the organization. And I want to talk about that.
Yeah, yeah, I think you're exactly right. And so I think the longer we let our ego control the way we exercise leadership, the darker and scarier it can get. And certainly we can cross the point of no return where there is no recovery. And again, I go back to this idea of building a sustainable practice of leadership with people who are empowered to tell you the truth. And so if we've got truth tellers around us, and if we're able to hear the truth, even when it's not flattering to ourselves, perhaps we can turn things around. But when we ignore those things and we continue down, the dark path of ego, sometimes we can't come back.
You present a lot to leaders. Do you present equally as much to people being led?
I do. So my passion actually is with emerging leaders. And so I love to be in the life and the careers of people who are coming into their sort of awakening of leadership, whether they've gotten a promotion, whether they're simply leading from the place they are. I love to help people develop that initial capacity. And so, yeah, I speak to a lot of followers, and one of the things that I stress is there's a lot of leadership in followership, right? And so, helping emerging leaders develop their practice, that really turns me on.
When do you notice, or how easy is it for you to notice change in attitude when you start to speak with people?
Yeah, it's very noticeable. And so, it's not uncommon that I see the light bulbs come on right before my very eyes, and that is such an energizing activity.
And it must give you a great sense of joy and accomplishment when you follow up with these folks to hear where their journey has taken them.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, whether they endeavor to be the chief of the department or the CEO of the bank, or whether their leadership practice keeps them right where they are, and they just are, this beacon of light from the bottom or the middle of an organization. I just love to see people who come into their own as far as their leadership practice.
Do you get those follow-ups?
I do. Yeah. I've got a robust relationships with, many people who have developed their leadership practice and have continued on with their organization and moved on to other organizations. It's great to hear back from people.
I think the underlying message of today for me resonates in the fact that it may be scary, but don't be afraid.
That's a great way to put it. I wish I would have said that.
I appreciate that today. And I have a new urge today for cookies. I don't know why. That wraps up today's session of FireWatch Live. Thank you, Scott, and for helping us understand how leadership can change us and how we need to stay aware of the impact it has on our behaviors and choices. Remember, true leadership is about growth, not ego. In our next session, we'll be discussing the critical importance of resilience in leadership and how to keep going when the challenges seem overwhelming. We hope you will join us for what's sure to be a powerful discussion. Until next time, bye-bye.